So some of you may have gotten a preview of some of these slides if you were sitting behind me any time today. I practiced last responsible moment, and these are brand new, fresh, hot off the presses. I don't usually push things quite to the last minute like that, but I had dinner with Aki on, what night was that? Was that Tuesday night? Tuesday night. And I said, I noticed that we don't actually have a title or an abstract for my talk. Probably I dropped the ball on an email somewhere and didn't get that sent in, and I felt bad about that, but I said that does mean you have a choice. I have a standard talk on agile testing practices and risk and uncertainty and why agile testing practices work that I've given a few times. I gave it first at Agile Testing Days Berlin last fall, and I've given it several times since then. So it's a solid, stable talk. I pretty much know how that one will go. We could do that. Or I have this harebrained idea that I've been working on that is close to ready to go about how Agile forces us out of the world of speculation and into reality. And Aki's eyes lit up, and he said, that sounds interesting. How close is close to ready to go? And I said, close. Well, Aki forced me out of the realm of speculation and into reality because I've now had to deliver. So this is brand new. Nobody's heard this talk before, including me. We'll see what happens. Now, since we're going to talk about speculation, I want to spend a minute exploring this idea of speculation. There's the stuff that we believe to be true about the universe, and then there's reality. And in the Dancing Wu Li Masters, Gary Zukav, that's the author, he says that we can't even contemplate reality, we can only contemplate ideas about reality. So this is what we're doing all the time. We're speculating, we're contemplating ideas about reality. Now, the problem is that reality and our ideas about reality don't always perfectly overlap. So there's the stuff that we believe to be true that turns out not to be. And then there's the stuff that we don't believe to be true or about which we are completely ignorant that turns out to be part of reality, and it's only where they overlap that the stuff that we believe actually is true. Now, how does this relate to software development? Well, if we're in a traditional project and we look at time versus speculation, in a traditional world, we start with some requirements analysis and we're doing some speculation about what the market wants or what our users want, and we're exploring the problem space, but we're theorizing at this point. And then we go into design and we theorize some more about what a good design to solve this hypothetical problem might possibly look like. And during this phase, we start making up solutions to hypothetical problems, and then we end up starting to address the hypothetical implications to the hypothetical solutions to the hypothetical problems. And the next thing you know, we've got a 180-page spec. And all of it is speculation, hence the name spec. Isn't that what that means? And then we start coding, and we still are not in the land of reality. We are still speculating that this big heaping pile of code that we have created is actually going to be useful, that it will provide value to the business. And then we get into testing, and perhaps the speculation level comes down a little bit because now we're getting some feedback, but it's not coming down all the way because even when we're testing, we are speculating. Every single bug that a tester files is a speculation about what would be important when we ship. So we're getting feedback, we're getting a little more real, but we're adding to the speculation pile nonetheless. Eventually we ship, and at that point, this whole pile of speculation comes down to reality, and everything that's under that curve is risk. So in a traditional project, what we have is this massive buildup of speculation until at last we ship and we find out what actually happened, right? Isn't this what we're doing? Okay. So at this point, I want to pause and tell you about the best project I've ever been on in my life. And fortunately, I have permission to talk about this. The project was called Bring Light. It's a website that allows you to make charitable contributions, and it allows charities to request money. But what's unique about Bring Light is that charities don't just say, we're good people, please give us money. They say, we have a specific project that we want to fund. We have a project for saving animals to be from being euthanized. We have, the Humane Society has a bunch of projects up that are about specific animals. Please fund so-and-so's eye surgery, and there's a lovely picture of a cute little dog. And there are, in this system, there are social networking features because donors can belong to donor groups, and donor groups can challenge their members to reach, as a cumulative group, a certain level of donations. So this website, and it also takes payments. And so there's some complex stuff here. It's financially critical, tracking all of those payments, and then because if you are a 503c corporation in the United States, there are certain reporting requirements. There's also some reporting stuff that relates to how much money you took in charitable contributions. So there's a fair amount of complexity here. We did this project with 4 people in 4 months, not counting the product owner. The product owner was the best product owner I have ever had the good fortune to work with. That may have partly been because he had his own money invested. So he was, in fact, spending his own money on developing this. And that somehow brings laser focus to the question of should we do this feature or not. Wow, I sacrificed the vacation with the family for that. No, we're not doing that one. But he also had just an innate ability to articulate his vision, help us understand what was important to him and what was not, both at a conceptual level and also just at a concrete, no, I don't care about that kind of bug level. So he had a great ability to have the vision and then also articulate it. He was completely engaged the entire project. He was on site for about 50% of the time. The other half of the time, he had to go talk to venture capitalists and partners, and he had to be out there being an entrepreneur. And so that period of when he was out of the office, he made sure that every single team member had his cell phone number, and we were welcome to call him at any time. He said, if I can't answer, if I'm in a meeting, I'm just not going to answer, but I don't want you to not call. Leave me a voicemail, and I will pick it up and return the call as soon as I'm out of the meeting with a venture capitalist. So this guy was so invested in this project and so engaged with us that it helped tremendously. And so I really enjoyed listening to Petri's talk just before mine on selling your customer, because a lot of the stuff that he talked about helping your customer do, our product owner already did, just naturally. The team itself was also practicing what I would call dials to 11 extreme programming. That meant that we were pairing all the time. We were doing test-driven development. Every line of code got a test before we wrote the line of code. Collective code ownership, continuous integration, automated acceptance regression tests. So we were doing the whole ball of wax in terms of all of the Agile practices. The end result was that when we shipped, so we were incrementally, I should back up and explain, we also incrementally delivered. So on an ongoing basis, our product owner was seeing the emerging system and was therefore able to use that to help steer the project. So he was ecstatic. He was also watching the story management this was a Pivotal Labs project, and Pivotal Labs has Pivotal Tracker, which is their story backlog management tool. And our product owner was watching Pivotal Tracker. He once told us, he came in one day and he said, you know, you guys, when I'm working at home, I sit there and I leave Pivotal Tracker up. Pivotal Tracker is an Ajax-y kind of Web 2.0 application, and so it automatically updates. It pulls the new data. He said, I sit there and watch it to watch when stories go from not started to done and ready to be delivered or ready to be accepted. And I get so excited as soon as I see one that's ready to be accepted that I immediately go check on the staging server. And he said, my only request is, can I get the SMSs to my cell phone so that I know exactly when you guys have delivered a new feature? He was just so excited about this stuff. And so excited to see his system that was in his head that he had imagined becoming real. Kind of like Pinocchio becoming real. He was just so excited. And that excitement, it permeated the whole team. So when we did go live, we decided that because even though we'd been pushing the staging basically every day, we decided when we went live that we would give ourselves a good extra padding, an extra window of time just in case something went wrong. So we started at 2 o'clock on Friday instead of 5 o'clock on Friday. So that was our extra padding, 3 hours. A few of you were laughing. I mean, I've been on projects where we gave ourselves 4 weeks of padding. Maybe you guys haven't had those kinds of projects where you needed 4 weeks of padding. But we took 3 hours on this project. So at 2 o'clock, we issued the one-line command that pushed the thing live to the production server. And then we verified that we actually had the code on the production server, that the password protection was off. And at that point, it was time to do one final proof of the pudding acceptance test, and that was to make a donation. So I got out my personal credit card and I picked a project, because we already had partners starting to get their projects that needed to be funded into the system. So I picked a worthy project, something about education, I think. And I made a $10 donation on my own personal credit card to make sure that the whole system was actually working end to end. And then we verified with the payment gateway that the payment had actually been received. And that was the final proof of the pudding acceptance test. And ta-da, we were live. It was now 2:10. And we looked at each other and said, now what do we do? And somebody said, beer? And we all said, beer! And then we hung out for another hour, and then we went home. And I didn't hear anything else. So at that point, we'd gone live, so I rolled off that project. And I didn't hear anything for another couple weeks. And then I saw somebody who was on the project sort of on a maintenance basis still, said, how'd it go? And she said, oh, it went great, but we did have one bug that required us to push an emergency unscheduled maintenance fix to the field. And I'm thinking, oh, what did we miss? So it only affected the administrators for charities. It only affected them under certain circumstances where they entered a URL. They didn't enter in the HTTP part. They just put in the URL. And under those circumstances, their data didn't get saved and they didn't get an error. But this was something that only 5 people on the planet needed to do. And it was easy to do customer education around that. But because our quality level was so high, that became an emergency push it to the field fix. So to me, that speaks volumes for the level of quality. I checked in with Drew McManus, was our product manager, or product owner rather, and I checked in with him some months later, like a year later, I think. And I said, so how's Bringlight? And he said, oh, it's great. We really don't need to do any more new features because it's as feature complete as it needs to be to serve the purpose that it serves. So our development team is now one part-time guy who occasionally does system administration stuff. When the ISP takes the server down, he reboots things. There had been no other emergency pushes to the field. So this is the only project in my entire history where we shipped on the day that we where we shipped, and it was such a low drama kind of event that it took all of 15 minutes to go live, maybe, and that was including getting the beer out of the refrigerator. And in production, we had one bug that required an emergency patch. That's it. And it's still in business today. So that project to me is a pretty good case study of what's possible with Agile. Now, I've had other projects with that group of people with Pivotal Labs, and they've all gone really well. It's just that Bring Light shines as this thing where, seriously, no drama, really high quality, incredibly ecstatic product owner. So they all go pretty well, but this one just shines. Now, I want to keep this one in mind as we talk about how Agile forces us to live in the world of reality. There were a bunch of themes in the story that I just told that I want us to keep in mind. One is the level of customer engagement that we had with Drew. I think that the Agile practices support that level of customer engagement. It gives us a mechanism for having good customers with good conversations with our customer. We did incremental delivery so that our customer could actually see the emerging system, put his hands on it, feel it, touch it, approve it feature by feature, incremental delivery by incremental delivery. That gave us feedback, but that wasn't the only feedback we had. We had a lot of other feedback, so we'll talk about feedback loops. And finally, status visibility. There was never a moment when Drew had to say, so, where are you guys with that? Because he could see where we were. So we had visible status at all times. Now, not all organizations have achieved that level of agility. And in some organizations, in fact, there's this effect that I call organizational anesthesia, where the organization is addicted to painkillers, compensating mechanisms that allow them to avoid reality. They like living in speculation land. Managers who really like the warm, fuzzy feeling of illusion around status. They want to believe that we are 95% complete. So they happily take a status report that says 95% complete without looking for empirical evidence. Speculation land is a warm and welcoming place where everything is possible. It's just a small matter of programming. So there's a huge temptation to live in this land, and that's one of the reasons, I think, why adopting Agile is a little hard, because it forces people to give up their illusions. People like to be in denial. Do y'all know Mythbusters? Adam Savage, I reject your reality and substitute my own. It's so tempting to live in that world. But the problem is that probability waveform from speculation will eventually collapse, as Schrodinger's cat teaches us. So Schrodinger's cat is the thought experiment from quantum physics, where the theory is nobody's ever done this, just in case you're an animal rights activist and you're concerned about the safety of a cat. But at least as far as I know, no one has ever done this. The idea is if we imagine that there's a cat in a box and you cannot see the cat, and there is a random event, let's say the decay of a particularly unstable radioactive particle. If it decays, then it flips a switch that causes poison gas to be pumped into the box that the cat is in. And if it does not decay, and let's say there's a 50-50 shot, if it does not decay, then the poison gas doesn't get pumped in and the cat lives. So at any given moment in time, until we look at the cat is in this probabilistic state where it might be alive or it might be dead. And so in a quantum sense, it exists in both states at the same time. That probability wave does not collapse until we get the empirical evidence about the cat's fate. Remember that buildup of speculation? That's Schrodinger's cat for software. At some point, we open the box and we find out, did the probability wave collapse with the project alive or the project dead? So now I want to talk about various sources of the speculation that go into that big speculation buildup. I want to talk about some sources of speculation. To illustrate my point, I want to tell you about a simulation that I run and have run over 100 times. It's the word count simulation. It's an agile transformation simulation in which participants take on roles. Some participants are developers, some are testers, some are product managers. They are building a system to count words. The words are on 3x5 cards, and the system is implemented in English also on 3x5 cards. So some participants play the role of computer, and they interpret the instructions written by the developers for how to count words on cards. So in this simulation, so I've run this over 100 times. I play the role of the customer when I am running this simulation. And it's fun to watch the patterns that occur over and over again. One of the patterns that tends to occur is that the product managers are too busy writing requirements to have a meeting with the customer. I don't know if you've ever seen that in the real world, but I find it highly amusing as the customer because they have some starting state, and so they're writing their requirements based on the information they have on a memo and not speaking to the customer, which means that when we actually finally get around to them saying, oh, customer, wouldn't you like to buy our software? And I say, well, let me try it out to see before I commit to buying the software. They're frequently surprised by what I actually try to do with the system. And it's not that I'm trying to trick them. There's nothing hidden. It's just that it doesn't even occur to them that somebody might try to count those particular words on cards. So we often are speculating about usage scenarios. And until we actually start getting people using the software, we don't find out what's real. Until we get concrete examples from our customers, we don't know what's real. For that matter, we may not even know what's important. We might know what's real, but we may have misjudged the significance of some things. And as an example of that, I have a friend who is in the middle of building an open source system it's a framework for managing complex data and relationships between things. You know what an ontology is? A collection of data about relationships between things and types of things and subclasses of things, and things have different types of relationships to each other. Well, he's building some software to manage ontologies. And it's very abstract at this point because it's general software to manage any kind of ontology. And he decided that it was time to build an ontology with his system. And that decision turned out to be a catalyst because he suddenly realized that he had made some assumptions about what he could do later. So he had prioritized it way, way low on his backlog. He's a one-person team, but he's doing it all agile. So he's the product owner and he's the implementation team, which leads to some interesting discussions in his head. But he had prioritized, in his mental role of product owner, some stuff pretty low that when he finally went to go implement an instance of this abstract thing that he's doing, he suddenly realized that it was way more important that you be able to customize the names of the fields that describe the relationships and so forth in a very friendly kind of way. So that's another example of speculating about usage scenarios. And remember, with Drew, one of the things that I loved about working with Drew on Bringlight was that I could come to him with questions about usage scenarios, and he could be so specific with me. He would say, well, let's take as an example this charity, the Women's Shelter Organization. They're going to want to do a project that looks like this, and so we have to be able to let them see this about it and that about it. And he was incredibly specific. So this is an example of starting with a story. A story is a placeholder for a conversation. In that conversation, we're having the discussion that allows us to arrive at shared understanding, and we're also getting very, very concrete examples and acceptance criteria out of that conversation. So unlike a traditional practice where we hand the document off to the next person, that level of engagement to understand what our customer wants forces us to live in their world, in their reality, as we're talking about their requirements. So back to word count. One of the other things that I find sometimes happens is that the developers are speculating about how stuff is gonna work. For that matter, the testers are also speculating, but it's the developers that really seem to suffer from this level of speculation. So I've had development teams in word count tell me, we tested that, as though it's somehow my fault that I wasn't buying their software. We tested that. What do you mean it doesn't work in production? And so the question would come up, well, how did you test it? And the answer, now remember, the code is English on cards. And so the way they tested it was by reading the instructions to see if it made sense to the developer. Not actually putting it on the simulated computer to see how the computer interpreted it. It's the classic, it works on my machine, except it works in my brain. I don't see what your problem is. It works in my brain. I've had development teams do big bang integrations where they write code for all of the features all together, all at once, and then put the whole thing onto the computer, and it takes the computer 15 minutes in a 15-minute work session just to read through all the new instructions, much less actually figure out what to do with them. So there, again, we have developers who are speculating. Ever seen any of these situations in the real world? See, this is what I love about simulations, because we can recreate the dysfunctions of the real world in an incredibly short amount of time. But then, even better yet, we get to actually reflect and adapt and fix them, and the whole point of word count is to give the teams an opportunity to self-organize to become more agile. Besides, it means that I get to take cute pictures of hamsters. Oh, I should explain why there are hamsters up on your screen. Just realized I'm so used to looking at these things, you have no idea why you're looking at hamsters. I have run this simulation over 100 times, but I tend to run it mostly with clients, and it would violate both moral and ethical and legal considerations for me to show you pictures of actual humans running this if they came from my client organizations. So I can't do that. So over Christmas break this year, I noticed that my 10-year-old, who has this thing about collecting cute stuff, she had this amazing collection of adorable little Japanese rubber hamsters. And when I say amazing collection, you're only seeing a tiny fraction of her collection. They filled the kitchen counter. And I was looking at them, and they were so cute. And she also had her Playmobil stuff out. You know Playmobil? Playmobil is amazing, the detail on the Playmobil things. So I started playing with the hamsters and then the little desks and the little computers, and that was when I got the idea. And the next thing I knew, I was doing a 2-day photo shoot with little rubber hamsters to recreate word count. But now I have pictures that have word count that I can show to people because it does not violate any of my non-disclosure agreements. I don't have any agreements with these guys. Incidentally, seeing as how I forgot to explain all that, let's go back to here. What you see here is the customer with a funny hat. The customer, when I remember to pack a funny hat, I wear a funny hat to play my role as customer. The customer is about to run their acceptance tests in the computer. The computer has a very sophisticated user interface that I have to certify people on before they're allowed to run the simulation. There are 3 trays. The input tray for data going in, the output tray where the computer places the output cards with the counter, with the errors, and then finally the installation tray where the developers are installing their new code. So we've got the computer back there, and by the way, the little black and white panda with the funny thing on his head, that's a paper hat, because typically what happens in the first round of the simulation is the computer is bored out of its skull, because nobody bothers to actually execute any tests in the first round. I should explain, in the first round, they are isolated as departments. We start with a very siloed, waterfallish kind of process that I enforce. That's what we start with, but from that point on, the group owns the process and can change whatever they want after the first round. But in the first round, we have the computer sitting in the computer lab, and we have the developers sitting in the development lab, and we've got the product managers. If there's a little corner office-y space with a window, or maybe the coffee is over there, that's where the product managers sit. And then we've got the testers all the way someplace far away, and they all have their own tables, and the only communication can occur through inter-office mail. Anybody working on that project? No, okay, yeah. So when the customer finally gets around to being asked, can you accept our system, oftentimes this is the first time the product managers have ever even had the opportunity to see what the system does. Now, going back here, what we can see here is the developers who are working away on their pile of green cards over here. The computer is bored in the background because nobody's done much with it. Oh, except looks like maybe the developers have already delivered one batch of code because there's some green stuff in the install tray. So the developers are busily speculating away as they write their code on green cards here. Now, in a traditional context, we typically get that big bang release. Right, we've done a bunch of analysis, we've done a bunch of specifying, we've done a bunch of implementation, then we do a bunch of testing and play whack-a-bug for a few months, and then finally we release in a big bang. Whereas Agile says we're going to release at least monthly. Right? If you're doing classic Scrum by the book, you probably have month-long iterations. If you're doing extreme programming, you might, or sprints. If you're doing extreme programming, you might have 1 or 2 week iterations. If you're doing Crystal, Alistair Coburn says in the Crystal book, it's my favorite chapter in the Crystal book, in which he says, well, so this might be kind of Agile, this is Agile, this, you're skating on thin ice here, and no, it's really not here. So what he says is that at least monthly, releasing software at least monthly. So we've got these iterations, and we're releasing, at the end of each iteration, we have releasable software. This is probably one of the hardest things for any organization that's making a transition to Agile, is to actually get releasable features on an incremental basis. Because typically what I see happen in an organization that's in transition, they don't have the automated regression tests yet, and they're having a really hard time getting the testing done within the sprint or within the iteration. And so typically what happens is that development is done. I love that, done. Yet, no, we've got a pile of code. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking that that's an asset. That's inventory. In the lean sense of the word, it's waste. We don't yet have product. We've got a pile of code that's not been tested. We are speculating that it's going to be useful. And then in the next iteration, the testers test what was produced in the previous iteration, and what we end up with is a series of mini waterfalls. So getting to this point where you actually have releasable software, a releasable system, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, that's hard. But if we do, then we've collapsed that probability wave down really small. We've got now real-world feedback. Speaking of which, feedback is an essential part of agility, and there are various levels of feedback. At the most basic and fast, quickest level, as a developer writing a line of code, I'm constantly running the unit tests on my local box. So those unit tests take seconds to run if they're really unit tests. They might take minutes to run if I'm in a legacy code situation where I really can't get to the microtest level because there's just so many dependencies. You have to instantiate 95 objects just to instantiate this one thing that you want to test. And in that case, they may take a little bit longer to run. But we're still talking minutes, seconds to minutes. So I'm getting incredibly fast feedback as a developer about the extent to which the code I am producing meets or violates expectations for the rest of the code base, right? Including my own expectations. So those are super fast, and then if I'm doing the whole continuous integration practice, before I check in that set of small changes, because I'm checking in frequently, I'm gonna get all of the updates from the source control repository and do a local merge and run all of the unit tests again before I check in, so that that build will stay green. So then we get the CI build, which becomes the heartbeat of the project. And we've got continuous feedback about the extent to which our build is healthy with respect to the expectations. So that heartbeat, that's kicking off as soon as a check-in occurs. And so we get feedback within 5 to 15 minutes at the most if we've got a code base that's well enough factored. Now, some organizations in transition have a very manual build process where there's kick off this makefile, babysit the thing, resolve any conflicts, then once this completes, manually copy the object files over to shared drive E, and then go kick off this other makefile, and by the time you're done with it, it takes like 36 hours from check-in to get a build. In that case, it's really hard to do this, but when we've achieved this level of agility, we're getting feedback about the health of our build every 5 to 15 minutes after something interesting after anything has changed. Then we've got another feedback level, system regression tests. Again, organizations in transition may not have these automated, but when we do have them automated, we get feedback about the extent to which we have maintained the health of our system from a user-facing perspective. And we're getting that feedback in minutes. And then we've got exploratory testing in an agile project where we've achieved all the things that I'm talking about. The quality level is sufficiently high that the system is always ready to explore. That means that at any given moment in time, somebody who has testing skill can play with it and provide feedback without having to, well, so I have a long QA background, most of my background is in QA, and there were times when we would get build after build in QA, and every one of them was dead on arrival. Within 3 minutes, we had found a fatal bug, like it wouldn't launch. That meant that there was no point in bothering to continue. That doesn't happen if we've got these other levels of feedback. We don't ever end up in that situation. We have software that's ready to be explored at any given time. So then we're getting feedback from an actual hands on the keyboard, end-to-end perspective. We're getting that feedback within a few hours. And then, because we're doing all of this, we can incrementally deploy the features as they're completed, and we can get real-world feedback either from our product owner or other internal stakeholders, or depending on the context, we may be able to get real-world feedback from real external users. Again, depending on the context. Right? Another source of endless speculation is the speculation around progress and productivity. So here in word count land, we see a product manager with the interoffice mail envelope, and then the little pink guy over there is the interoffice mail courier. That's how mail gets from person to person in this. And in the first round, the product managers of word count have no mechanism to get status other than the prescribed status reports that development and test are supposed to send them. Incidentally, about 80% of the time, development and test don't bother sending the status reports. So the product manager truly is operating blindly the entire time. Or they can send notes and ask questions. And they don't usually get back very interesting answers. So they have to speculate. And they will frequently ask me as the facilitator, where are we? And I'm in that role as the facilitator, I have to say, I don't know, it's your organization. How come you don't know what's going on? So in the second round, inevitably, there is a request by everybody to hold status meetings. These are ceremonies in most organizations in the real world, and in the simulation, they aren't much better. So in the real world, I've been on this project where week 1, where are we? We started. And by week 3, where are we with this particular feature? Oh, we're 80% done. And then by week 5, where are we? We're 80% done. And on week N, we are 80% done. And nobody actually has any idea what's going on, but we spend 2 hours a week talking about it. Does that feel uncomfortably familiar? Oh, I've been in those meetings. Now, some organizations, in an attempt to get much more precise, will measure effort and hours against estimates. So where are we? We've completed 40 out of 160 hours. Where are we? We've completed 120 out of 160 hours. Where are we? We've completed 200 out of 160 hours. Where are we? Take the week number, multiply by 40. This is an example of confusing speed with progress. Just because we're going really fast doesn't mean we're getting anywhere. My favorite story about this comes not from software, but from a story that a friend of mine was telling me about a situation where he had to fly into an airport and then had an appointment that was hundreds of miles away because it was so remote, the area where he was going was so remote. So he flies into the airport. He'd gotten a red eye. When you fly across the United States, there are flights that will leave the West Coast at 11 o'clock at night, and they'll deposit you on the East Coast at sometime 6 o'clock in the morning, which means you get no sleep. You get something like 10 o'clock to 6, something like that. So he had no sleep, absolutely exhausted, gets in the rental car, proceeds to drive. He's been driving for about 2 hours, and he has at this point convinced himself that the sun rises in the west, therefore he's going in the right direction. Let's just say he was late to his appointment. That was, I reject your reality and substitute my own. That was, yeah. So in Agile projects, we have various mechanisms to understand status that make status visible. Now, this is really important because there's something about the status meetings that isn't just a problem with not actually knowing where we are, it's how much time it takes to communicate, even if we do know where we are. What we're doing is communicating about something that should be visible. So we're using a communication solution to solve a visibility problem, and that means that although we will get there eventually, it's really inefficient. Status is one of those things that we shouldn't have to talk about, we should be able to just see. And when we see it, it should be empirical evidence, not an assertion that I'm 80% done. So the kind of empirical evidence that I'm looking for are build status. Remember, that's the heartbeat of the system. I want to be able to see what's green, what's red. That's going to tell me far more than anybody telling me in a lot of words about where they think they are. I want to see cards moving across the Kanban board or the storyboard. I want to see evidence of progress in terms of things moving. And I want to see actual demos of stuff. This is why that end of iteration demo is so crucial. On one project where I am a consultant, so I do sometimes spend time on real projects with my hands on the keyboard and delivery responsibilities. But most of my time, I'm an outsider, a tourist, if you will. So in one case, I was a tourist in an organization, and I got to see their end of sprint demo, and I was so excited to see their end of sprint demo. It was done on PowerPoint, and this was not Microsoft. That's not an end of sprint demo. So an end of sprint demo is where we actually get to see something that shows visible evidence of the progress that we have made. The result of all of this stuff is that we're eliminating that speculation buildup. So as Schrodinger's cat will suggest to us, Agile practices collapse the probability wave and thereby are reducing risk. This is what allows us on Agile teams to achieve the promise of Agile. And to me, the promise of Agile, and the only way that I can measure the agility of a team, is to look at the final results. And what I expect to see is a consistent and frequent delivery of business value at a sustainable pace in a way that allows us to adapt to the changing needs of the business. And that's what I think Agile is. And that's how I think that when we do Agile, we are forcing ourselves out of the fairyland of speculation and into the world of reality. And I think I'm done on time. So that's all I had to say.